There is something happening inside your brain right now that you cannot feel, cannot see, and almost certainly have not been told about. And the first place it shows up, before any memory test catches it, before any doctor notices it, before you yourself would ever suspect it, is your nose. Stay with me, because what I am about to show you in the next few minutes has been confirmed by some of the most rigorous neuroscience research of the last 2 decades, and it will permanently change the way you think about your own brain. My name is Dr. Vincent Halberg. I have spent the better part of 30 years studying the early warning architecture of cognitive decline, the signals the brain produces long before the damage becomes visible, long before the diagnosis arrives, and long before the window to do something meaningful about it begins to close. What I have learned is this: the brain does not fail suddenly. It warns you, quietly, persistently, through signs so subtle that most people dismiss them entirely. 7 of them, to be specific, and the last one, the one connected directly to your nose, is the most alarming discovery in modern Alzheimer's research. Most people have never heard of it, and that silence is costing them years. Before I walk you through all 7, I want to ask you something. Think about the last few months. Have you ever been in the middle of a sentence and lost the word you were reaching for, a word you know perfectly well, a word you have used 1,000 times, and it simply wasn't there? Have you ever walked into a room, stopped, and felt that strange blankness where the reason you came should have been? Have you found yourself rereading the same paragraph, the same message, the same line of text, not because it was difficult, but because your mind kept pulling away from it? If any of that is familiar, I need you to understand something important. These are not signs of stress. They are not signs of a bad week. They are the brain's earliest language, and most people do not speak it. Here is what the science tells us, and what almost no one explains clearly enough. Memory loss is not the beginning of the problem. It is the announcement that the problem has already been growing for years. The real threat, the one that starts silently, invisibly, sometimes a decade or more before any symptom becomes obvious, is called neuroinflammation, a slow, sustained inflammatory response inside the brain that gradually damages the connections between neurons, disrupts the brain's ability to clear toxic waste, accelerates oxidative stress, and erodes cognitive function one quiet layer at a time. You don't feel it happening. That is precisely what makes it dangerous. And that is precisely why the 7 signs I am about to share with you are so critical, because they are the only early language the inflamed brain speaks. And if you know how to listen, you can still do something about it. The first sign is word retrieval failure. This is the moment mid-sentence when the word you need disappears. You know the concept. You can feel the word hovering just beyond reach, but the retrieval pathway stalls. This happens because the hippocampus, the brain region central to memory formation and access, is among the first areas affected when neuroinflammation begins to rise. The connections slow. The retrieval becomes unreliable. And because it happens in isolated moments, scattered across days and weeks, most people never recognize as a pattern. But it is one. The second sign is concentration that breaks on simple things, not complex problems. Simple ones. A conversation you care about. A book you chose because you wanted to read it. A task at work that you have done 100 times. If you're finding that your attention slips in situations where it used to hold steady, where you never had to fight for focus before, this is your prefrontal cortex signaling that it is under metabolic pressure. Sustained attention is one of the earliest cognitive casualties of a brain under inflammatory stress. The brain does not announce this as decline. It announces it as frustration, as distraction, as a feeling that you are simply not as sharp as you used to be. But sharpness is not a personality trait. It is a biological state, and it can change. The third sign is mood instability without obvious cause, irritability that seems disproportionate, anxiety that floats without an anchor, a subtle emotional flatness, a quiet dulling of enthusiasm and engagement that you have started to accept as who you are now. The brain's limbic system, which governs emotional regulation, shares its inflammatory pathways directly with the memory and focus systems. When neuroinflammation rises, mood is frequently the first visible disruption. Most people seek emotional explanations for what is actually a neurological signal. They adjust their expectations of themselves. They cope. They do not connect the dots. The fourth sign is sleep, that no longer restores. Not necessarily the inability to fall asleep, but the inability to stay in deep, restorative sleep long enough for the brain to complete its most critical nightly function. While you sleep, your brain activates the glymphatic system, a biological waste-clearing network that flushes toxic proteins, including amyloid beta, the protein that accumulates in Alzheimer's-affected brains. When sleep is fragmented, the system cannot finish its work. The toxins remain. The inflammation compounds. And each disrupted night adds to the burden of the one before it. Most people treat this as a sleep problem. It is a brain problem wearing the mask of a sleep problem. The fifth sign is mental fatigue that arrives too early and too easily. Not the physical tiredness of a long day, but a specific cognitive exhaustion. The feeling of your brain hitting a wall after tasks that used to feel effortless. Decision fatigue that comes faster than it should. A resistance to mental engagement that you rationalize as laziness or low motivation, but that actually reflects a brain spending more energy than it should to maintain basic cognitive function. When neurons are inflamed, their efficiency drops. The brain works harder to produce the same output, and the result is a kind of mental tiredness that sleep alone does not seem to fix. The sixth sign is subtle spatial and time disorientation, moments where you lose track of what day it is more often than feels normal. Brief confusion about direction or sequence, not dramatic, not alarming, just slightly more frequent than it used to be. A sense of occasionally feeling slightly unmoored in time or context for just a moment before it passes. These micro-disorientation events are often dismissed entirely because they resolve quickly and seem harmless. But the regions of the brain that govern spatial reasoning and temporal orientation, including the entorhinal cortex, are among the earliest targets of the degenerative processes associated with cognitive decline. And now, the seventh sign, the one that no one warned you about, the one that has been quietly hiding in plain sight, the one that neuroscientists at Harvard, at the Mayo Clinic, and in peer-reviewed studies published in some of the most respected journals in the world have now confirmed is one of the earliest and most reliable predictors of Alzheimer's disease, appearing up to 10 years before any memory symptom becomes obvious. It is your sense of smell, not a dramatic, sudden loss. Nothing you would ever call a medical symptom on its own, just a quiet, gradual dimming. Coffee that used to smell rich and strong now smells like something more distant. Flowers that used to stop you in your tracks. Food that doesn't quite smell the way it used to. Scents from your past. Places, people, memories attached to smell that seem slightly faded, slightly further away than they should be. Most people attribute this to age, to congestion, to nothing at all, because the change is so slow they barely register it. But here is the truth. The olfactory bulb, the brain structure that processes smell, has a direct anatomical connection to the hippocampus and the entorhinal cortex. These are the two brain regions that Alzheimer's disease damages first. Before it touches anything else, before it disrupts memory or language or personality, the disease begins its work in these regions. And because the olfactory system is directly wired into them, the degradation of smell sensitivity is one of the earliest external signals that something is beginning to change in those structures. Researchers are now using standardized smell tests as a screening tool for early cognitive vulnerability. Think about what that means. Your nose, not a brain scan, not a blood test, not a memory exam. Your nose may be one of the most sensitive early warning instruments your brain possesses. And if that instrument is quietly dimming, your brain may already be sending you a signal that deserves a response. I want to pause here because I know what some of you are thinking. You are recognizing these signs. One of them, maybe more, and part of you wants to close this window and file it away as something to think about later. I understand that impulse, but I want to challenge it directly. Because here's the reality that the mainstream conversation about brain health consistently fails to communicate clearly enough. The window in which the brain is still responsive, still capable of being meaningfully supported, does not stay open indefinitely. Neuroinflammation is not a condition that stabilizes on its own. Oxidative stress does not plateau out of kindness. The gradual loss of neural efficiency does not pause while you decide whether or not to pay attention to it. The people who are cognitively sharp and independent at 75, at 80, at 85, who remember names, hold conversations, stay present, and live without the fear of losing themselves. They are not simply lucky. In the vast majority of cases, they made choices earlier. They supported their brain before the decline became undeniable. They responded to the signals before the signals became symptoms. And right now, there's a growing body of people who recognize exactly what you may be recognizing today, who noticed 2 or 3 or 4 of these 7 signs and decided not to wait, who have found meaningful support through a natural approach designed specifically to address the root biology of cognitive decline, not to mask the symptoms, not to create a dependency, but to work with the brain's own systems, reducing the inflammatory load, supporting efficient neuron communication, helping the glymphatic system do the clearing work it was designed to do, and protecting against the oxidative damage that accelerates everything. The results they describe are not dramatic, overnight transformations. They are something quieter and more real than that. Words coming back faster, thoughts completing themselves, the ability to stay present in a conversation without fighting for focus, the return of a mental clarity they had accepted, slowly and without realizing it, as something they'd already lost. That is the promise. Not a cure, not a miracle, but the recovery of ground that should never have been surrendered in the first place. And the restoration of confidence. The confidence of knowing your mind is still yours, still working for you, still sharp enough to be trusted, if that is what you want. And I believe it is, because you're still here. The next step is simple. The link is in the description below this video. It is also pinned in the first comment. Go there now. Read what is there carefully, because the information you will find is not a sales pitch. It is a logical continuation of everything I have just told you. Now, let me leave you with one final thought, and I want you to sit with it. Every one of the 7 signs I described today, the word that disappears mid-sentence, the focus that fractures on simple tasks, the mood that shifts without explanation, the sleep that no longer fully restores, the mental fatigue that arrives too soon, the subtle spatial drift, and the quiet dimming of smell, every single one of them is the brain doing the only thing it can do. It cannot speak. It cannot write you a note. It cannot make an appointment and sit across from you and say, clearly, I need help. All it can do is produce signals and hope you are paying attention. Today, you paid attention. But paying attention is not enough if it ends here, because the biology does not wait. The inflammation does not pause. The toxins continue to accumulate every single day that passes without support. And the people who read this moment correctly, who understood that acting now, while the brain is still responsive, is categorically different from acting later, when it is not, those people will look back on this video as a turning point. The people who dismiss it will look back differently. You are not out of time, but you are not in unlimited time either. The brain you have today is more capable of responding to support than the brain you will have in 6 months if nothing changes. That is not a threat. That is biology. And biology does not negotiate. The link is below. The first comment has it too. Go there now, because the version of you that is still sharp, still clear, still fully present, that version is still within reach. But only if you reach for it today.